All right, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much, Crystal, for those wonderful speeches to kind of set the tone. And thank all of you for being here tonight, right? So, I mean, obviously, there was a very momentous day a couple days ago. Elections are very important in a country like this, but I think what I see too right here is that, you know, democracy is not just about going to the voting booth and ticking a box and then going home the next day. It's exactly meetings like this. Maybe you told a friend about this meeting, maybe you brought your family here, and it's exactly like this how change happens, with people coming together, organizing under a common cause, and talking about the issues that are important to us. So again, just thank you for coming tonight. My name is Diego Morales. I am an organizer with the Lift the Ban on Rent Control Coalition. I live in Chicago, I grew up in Rockford. But I was going to do a little presentation and talk about our campaign, to talk about rent and housing in this area and the state. But really quick, I wanted to get a quick show of hands. Who in the room is a renter? That's a solid majority, okay. Raise your hand if your rent has gone up in the past year. Okay. Does anybody want to maybe volunteer how much their rent has gone up in the past year or so? How many dollars?
100, from 900 to 1,000.
Wow.
That's with utility costs.
Wow, that's more than 10%. $100. How much, anybody else get their rent jacked up?
$760 to $850, and that's without utilities.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's like $90. That's a lot. Anybody else?
I live at the flats, and yeah, they keep going up, and I'm paying about $150 more, including utilities.
Wow. That is awful. Yeah, I mean, second shout out for that great company right there. So yeah, how do y'all feel about that? Does that feel good? Right, that sucks. Yeah, I've gotten my rent jacked up about $150 in the past year as well. You know, it sounds like a small amount of money, right? But you know, a little bit on the tipping point means like, oh, I gotta shift to this, I gotta maybe delay my car payment, or I gotta like, you know, eat the cheaper brand of pasta from the store, or whatever it happens to be, and it can really have an effect on your life. And you know, we live in a society in which we have major companies that make a lot of money. All that money that you're paying in rent is going to somebody who doesn't have to deal with the same issues as you do. Probably lives in a very, very nice condo, home somewhere. There's probably a vacation right now somewhere warm. From the money that you give them every single month. And so what we want to talk about is, how do we change this? How do we fight for justice in this kind of a system? And that's why we consider rent control to be such an important issue. I'm going to go through just some basic housing facts real here. So in Illinois, a couple of terms that you should know is rent burden. So the way that the federal government tracks housing costs is how much of your income are you spending on housing every month or every year, right? So if you're rent burdened, that means you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing. So raise your hand if you spend about more than a third of your check on rent or mortgages or whatever. Okay, great. Well, not great, but there's representation here. So, and then there's severe rent burden. That is when your rent and your housing costs more than 50% of your income. So raise your hand if you're severely rent burdened. Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's not a fun place to be. Well, in Illinois, about half of renters in the state are rent burdened, 47.6%. And while people are being rent burdened, rent has been going up, especially since the pandemic. Since the pandemic, you've seen a lot of consolidation in the housing market, lots of investors coming in, buying up homes, buying up land, kicking people out, jacking up rents. It's something that maybe you would heard about or thought about happening in cities where we call it gentrification, but you're seeing, especially in towns like Bloomington, Normal, where you have this kind of captive student population, the exact same process is happening here. You know, since the pandemic, rent has increased statewide 55% since early 2019, early 2020. We are the fourth in the entire country for rent increasing from year to year. And there's also some numbers here from McLean County, very similar. 51%, more than half of people here are rent burdened, and since the pandemic, there's been about 31% increase in rents, and that is just unsustainable. Has anybody seen a 30% increase in their check, in their income? Okay, if you do, let me know. I think it's better. That makes me a little more. So one of the worst aspects about housing insecurity and the housing crisis is that it leads, what it can lead to. And the number one cause of homelessness in the country is unaffordable housing. So the last time there was a survey of evictions in Illinois was in 2016. And just here in McLean County, just here in these boundaries, back then, which was a much smaller number than it is now, back then it was 756 people were taken to court and kicked out of their homes every single year, just here in McLean County. Homelessness, since 2019, there's about 12,000 people who live without shelter. Again, that is a liberal number because since the pandemic, that number has skyrocketed. And there's also this other category, which I think some people actually mention, these people living in couches and lounge rooms and things like that. They're called doubled up, where you may sleep under a roof at night, but it's not your roof, and you don't know how long you will have that kind of place to stay. Maybe you're staying at an auntie's house, maybe you're staying with a friend, etc. That is a form of homelessness that doesn't get talked about enough. But when you factor in something like that, it's 170,000 homeless people who live like that in Illinois. We're called Lift the Ban, and the reason for that is that in 1997, going back, there was this conservative lobbying group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council Group. Yes. So ALEC is famous for greatest hits like right-to-work laws that made it harder to form and join a union, the Stand Your Ground law that was used to justify the murder of Trayvon Martin in Florida, the law that made it a felony to protest pipelines, actually here in Illinois, if you remember that, if you've ever been in environmental organizing. So, not the coolest or friendliest people that you'd ever meet, but in 1997 they passed what was called the Rent Control Preemption Act. They were passing these laws that basically prohibited any state or municipality from regulating rents in any way whatsoever. And they were doing this across the entire country. And in fact, currently there are 33 states, including Illinois, that have had this ban. And no one has been able to get rid of it so far. We're hoping to change that in Illinois. Something I think that is not understood quite enough is that rent control is not this crazy, like far-out, radical idea. It is very, very common in most parts of the world, including the developed OECD nations, but even here in the United States, there are actually 7 states here who have some form of rent control. You may have heard about California, you may have heard about New York, but did you know that it's also in Oregon, in Minnesota, not too far from here, Maine, New Jersey, Washington, D.C. This is, these places have had rent control regimes. Some are younger, some are older, but it's not some crazy idea, and go to any of these places, the sky has not fallen in the way that the real estate law people tell you it will, if they have some form of rent control. So that's why we're called Lift the Ban. A little bit about our campaign. We launched in 2017. We started out humbly as 4 community organizations in the city of Chicago that represented a multiracial coalition. Everybody told us, oh, rent control, yeah, that's cool and all, but you're crazy, no one likes it, academics hate it, the politicians hate it, it's blah, 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 blah. We were like, okay, you know what, let's put that to the test. So we started off as 4 organizations, and right now we have nearly 40 statewide. That includes labor unions, that includes legal aid organizations, student associations like many that are on campus, community boards, etc. One of the first things that we did is we wanted to kind of call the question, oh, people say this is such a bad idea, well, let's ask regular, everyday working people what they think. So in 2018, we put referenda across 12 different wards. So a little bit on Chicago government, there's 50 different wards, 50 different districts. Way too many if you ask me. But we put the question, collected signatures to put the question on the ballot in 12 different wards. That was like, would you support lifting the ban on rent control so we can start talking about regulating rents in the city of Chicago? And everywhere we put the question, the north side of the city, the south side of the city, the west side of the city, it got no less than 70% approval. So we were able to change the conversation. And if, I don't know, I guess you weren't there necessarily to see this, but every politician that ran in 2019, whether it was in Chicago or even J.B. Pritzker, people running for governor, they were all asked, do you support lifting the ban on rent control? We made it a big mainstream issue. So it was kind of a display of how, yeah, you're in a small group, that everybody thinks you can't do nothing, you get together with a good idea, you work at it, you can really change the conversation. And also, spoiler alert, J.B. Pritzker, who was running for governor at that time, said he supported lifting the ban on rent control. Haven't heard much about that since he got elected, but we can get to that later. Some other small pieces of history, we did get a committee vote in the state legislature in 2021. So I guess I don't know if this was obvious before, but the rent control ban was passed at the state level. So what we have to do is pass the repeal that law at the state level. That's why this is focused on your state senator, your state representative, and the governor. Because we have great board members here who want to do stuff, who want to help. They just want to help people like you against the greed of these corporations, but they can't. They're being gagged by the state. So that's why this is focused on state governor. And now, one interesting piece is that we used to have a piece, the legislation was very simple. It was one line. It was repeal the Rent Control Preemption Act. Very easy, but the real estate lobby is very powerful. And the money that they make ends up going back into the races, the elected races that people mentioned before, and it becomes a larger issue. I'll get to in a moment. But basically, we had to kind of come to some kind of a compromise. So we did come to a sort of compromise. So our bill now has kind of two main components. The first, with respect to rent control, is that it opens up a path to lifting the ban on rent control. The idea is, if we pass this bill, it gives you the power through referenda to lift the ban where you live. So you can have the referenda here in Normal. You can have the referenda here in the area around your campus, all of McLean County. Whichever seems appropriate to you, you ask the question, do we want to lift the ban? If it passes, that becomes law. It's a way to kind of democratize the process, to say, well, it might be different in Normal than it is in Peoria, than it is in East St. Louis, etc. So this is a way of us, well, let's have the people decide. The second aspect of the bill is that it expands renter protections across the state. So in Cook County, there's an existing sort of like tenant's bill of rights that gives you power as a tenant. It was passed not too long ago, I think in 2019. And so what our bill would do is take those same protections and expand it all across the state. So it would apply to you. What that could mean, for instance, and we can get into the specifics, is it protects you from retaliation, for instance. Because what you see often is, once you start asking questions of your landlord, oh, like why is the heat not working? Why is the stairwell look like it's gonna, kill my mom when she tries to get up to see me for Thanksgiving or whatever? Why is there water coming in through my roof? What they'll do is they'll retaliate against you, right? They'll be like, not only will they not get to it, but then they'll find excuses to jack your rent up, to push you out. Right? That's one of the most common ways that we see landlords abuse their power. So what this does is it protects you against that. Creates penalties, you can take them to court, etc. Other things, limits on move-in fees. Move-in fees are totally crazy. Proper notice for terminations of lease and entry. Right? Y'all won the 12-hour entry. I think it's actually 24 to 48 hours in the Cook County one. I can double check, but it's definitely longer than 12. We can get into the specifics. Right now, we have 14 co-sponsors or sponsors on the bill. That includes downstate and suburban legislators. One thing I want to just talk about our campaign, we started off in Chicago, and one of the phrases that we hear is like, oh, well, that's a Chicago problem. That's not our problem. I actually remember, not to put him on blast, David Kaler, actually, the first time we spoke with him, he was like, that's a Chicago thing. And then we had a resident of a trailer park home say like, hey, actually, I got my lot rent jacked up like $200, and there's this company that came and bought it. It's like, oh, yeah, okay, now. Okay, this is an issue that affects my community. So it's a really big deal that we now have support in our building support across places in Illinois, such as Bloomington, Normal, and others. We had the first downstate legislator, Sue Shear of Springfield, sign on to our bill. The first downstate legislator, thanks to Rosa, actually, the organizer in the back, and her work in Springfield, Illinois. Shout out, Rosa. Thank you. And it just shows the power of organizing. I wanted to get to like open comment and questions and stuff like that, but just to run really quick of some of the tenants' rights, because people ask this question a lot. One of the things that our bill would do is, if there are certain repairs that aren't being done, that's the responsibility of your landlord, you have the right to withhold your rent. You have the right to say, you're not holding up your end of the deal, so I'm not obligated to give you my hard-earned money to keep my unmaintained house. That's a way to like pressure them to behave better, right? Excessive late fees, limit security deposits to 1.5 times rent. Also create standards for adequate heating in the winter. That's a huge deal for us in Chicago that we rely on a lot, is that by law you have to keep the temperature at least, I think, 68, 69 degrees during winter months. If they don't, That is a big no-no. Consequences for unlawful entry and harassment. And the big one is frankly protection against retaliation. It allows you to express your rights as a tenant. What does rent control look like? This is just a map of all the different places I mentioned before, the 7 different states that have some form of rent control or other. Minnesota is one of the most recent, in St. Paul, and yeah, exciting things happening. Oregon and Washington State actually, there's a huge campaign right now, helped in part by labor. There's a labor union pushing rent control there. And some specifics, because some people will try to, they bring up concerns, and there's some valid concerns. It's a policy they're not necessarily used to. And so what people may not be exposed to is how rent control actually works in practice in these kinds of places. So back in World War II, that's one of your classic kind of rent control policies that were in place, which is just like a hard cap, which is just like your rent doesn't go up at all. It was like hard price fixing. And that's just not what rent control looks like now in the sort of modern era. What it does is it creates a sort of control and cap on the rate that it can go up from year to year. So let's say they don't, a rent control could look like you can't have your rent go up more than 5% from year to year. Now, it sucks to have your rent go up 5%, but it's certainly better than what we see in a lot of these cases where they jack it up 10%, 20%. I think there was a group recently in my neighborhood that was organizing a tenant union, and they got their next rent bill jacked up to 50%. So this will help stop those extreme cases and kind of steady increase stabilization for housing prices. Typically there's a rent board that usually will have some representation between tenants, renters, and homeowners that basically sets what that rate would look like. And you can do all kinds of things. You can index it to different things. You can index it to inflation. You can index it to interest rates, different costs. The point is that there's flexibility. It's not this crazy, draconian thing. There's other things like rent justification. Let's say you're a small mom and pop landlord, and like a tree, comes down and busts your roof open, and it's like, that's very expensive. There's ways that they can take exceptions where they can go to the board and be like, hey, look, there's a huge cost that I have to deal with, spend tens of thousands of dollars to repair a roof or something like that. Like, there's no way for me to do this without raising the rent maybe a little past the limit. The point is it's not, end of the world, as some of the real estate lobby folks try to say, for your mom and pop, smaller landlords. Typical exemptions also include new construction, buildings built past a certain date, owner-occupied buildings. This is how it operates in places like New York and California. So just to kind of help inoculate people against some of the talking points that you hear, because it's not really based on how this operates in reality. So just a couple of quick facts too about you all, and actually I can't wait to hear more from you all what it's like trying to find housing and live on campus. But there's a lot of you all, and y'all make up about 40% of the population of Normal. That's a lot. That's also, think about enormous power. Imagine you all organizing together, advocating in your own self-interests. That is a lot of people. 92.6% of you receive financial aid, so I'm assuming almost every one of you. That goes to show that, we're not all, cash is not super abundant necessarily in the student population, right? We have those we have to pay and the struggles that we go against too. And then, like was mentioned earlier, yesterday is the anniversary of your successful fight against some of these massive corporate landlords like Sammy, Young America, and First Sight, winning that notice for entry. Huge, by the way. Super. Can we just get a quick round of applause for you all? Winning something, that's dope. And so, there people try to tell me about the big four. So Young America, Sammy, First Sight, and Class Act, I think. Of them, Young America is the biggest. They rake in about $20.7 million every year. First Sight, I think, was about like $13 million. And I think what's important to think about that is, of course, that's the money that we pay them every single month. But that's also money that, as Alex mentioned, that they spend on your elections, that they spend on the people who represent you, who try to advocate for their interests and not yours. That's just a very important point to make. So thanks for folks, we love politicians and candidates who run not taking that kind of money and relying on grassroots energy. So How can you get involved? Well, you have two folks that I would like you to introduce yourselves to and maybe get in contact with. The first is State Representative Sharon Chung, who represents your district. I got her phone number and email up on the screen. She's super key in order for us to help get legislation like this passed. In the State House, actually with the help of a woman who used to be an organizer in the band, actually, Ileana Ramirez, who is actually now a congresswoman in Chicago. When she was in the House, helped create the Housing Committee, a place in the state legislature that could focus on housing issues. There wasn't one before, if you can believe that. There was no committee in the state legislature who was talking about the housing crisis. So she helped create that. So Sharon Chung is in the House. Her support is super crucial in order to get something like this passed. So please get involved. We also, and reach out to her. We have like a form letter. It should be on the pass out handout thing. If not, I will share it up on the screen in just a moment. But it has like a pre-written letter that you can like edit if you would like. You can get super nasty with it. That's how you can be super nice with it. Either way works. You hit send and it'll send it to your representatives automatically. We've got like also bit.ly links for our newsletter and renter stories. So something that I'm wrapping up, but one thing I just want to say is there's a lot to talk about when it comes to like the data, about like following the trends, et cetera, et cetera. But in my experience doing this, being in this campaign for almost since 2018, like 6 years now, there's nothing that is more powerful than you telling your story, right? Than you allowing yourself a certain vulnerability to stand up for yourself and talk about how the injustice has been done, not just to you, but yourself. You getting involved and talking with your legislator, telling those kinds of stories, that's when we have seen people go from a no to a yes. So I just want to reemphasize that point, because if you have those stories, if you know people with those stories, please like share them here in this meeting, share them with us through this link, and let's talk and chat afterwards, because that's really the fuel with which we win certain things like this. So with that, that wraps up my presentation. Thank you all again for listening, and for this section now we're going to open it up. If people have any questions, you can answer questions, but also if you just have comments that you would like to make, if you have a story that you would like to tell, if you know somebody who's struggling with rent, or you yourself are, we would love to hear what that's like, what you're going through. So yeah, any questions or comments? Go ahead.
I was going to ask,